Hello, and welcome to the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create an empowering resource for those who wish to discover more about these topics. I pray that this podcast will not only bless you, but that it will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. I am very excited for today's episode because it's going to be an in-depth overview of my bipolar disorder diagnosis and how I felt during the time that I first got diagnosed. But before I dive into this episode, I wanted to go over the highs and lows for the week. So, as a very high, it was my baby boy Felix's birthday this week. On Thursday, January 11th, he turned 5 years old, and I am just super excited for him. And I know, like, as an animal, it was probably just another day for him, but I am excited for him because he has been such a blessing in my life, and I cannot tell you how many times he has just gotten me through some really, really difficult moments in my life just by being there and just by being as emotionally supportive as he could in his own little way. But yeah, I am a proud cat mom, and I was just so happy to celebrate my baby boy's birthday. And for the lows, I didn't really have a lot of lows this week, thank God. But one in particular was me being exhausted for most of the week. I need to really get a handle on my sleeping schedule, but that's easier said than done anyway. But at the same time, I am just thankful that this week was a pretty chill week and it wasn't really anything terrible going on, which I am, again, very grateful for. So, today's episode is all about my bipolar diagnosis and what my reactions were in terms of getting the diagnosis and how it has changed my life since then. So, I'm going to start off with reading a definition of what bipolar disorder actually is, just so that there is some context for my diagnosis. So, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, specifically the 5th edition, bipolar disorder is a mood disorder. It is separate from depressive disorders, borderline personality disorder, and schizophrenia. Although these symptoms can overlap, bipolar disorder specifically affects changes in mood. Bipolar disorder affects chemicals in the brain, which cause shifts in mood, which are not often normal responses to external events. So, that is the clinical definition for bipolar disorder. And I also wanted to talk about how I felt when I first got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And fortunately, I've written a journal entry on that day because I had a journal with me while I was in the mental hospital, and I wrote an entire essay about this moment. But I'm only going to read little excerpts from that because, yeah, it was a lot. I'm not going to lie. But here is just a little excerpt to kind of give you an idea of what was going on in my mind during that time. So this was on January 8th, 2021. I wrote, "Dear God, it's official. I have bipolar disorder. I honestly don't know what to feel. I've been trying to find the answer to an age-old question. What's wrong with me? Now, there isn't anything wrong with me. I just have a fairly common, lifelong, and treatable disease." And this is in parentheses, and it's sarcastic. Great. As I'm reading this, I realize that most of these symptoms, i.e., the manic episode symptoms, perfectly describe what I've been feeling since Christmas weekend, especially the decreased need for sleep, talking fast, and having racing thoughts. I have always thought to myself, when people describe their diagnosis, that I'm blessed to not have that issue. There was always a hint of pride in those thoughts. Well, now I'm being humbled in what seems like the worst way possible. I have a mental illness, which clearly manifested itself over the last week and a half. I'm exhausted and I have trouble sleeping. And I'm currently in a psych ward, hoping to make it back to my normal routine in my life. So, when I read that excerpt, and even hearing it as I have just read it to you, it's very clear that this was such a huge blindside in my life because let's be honest, nobody really expects or wishes for these things to happen. And when they do happen, it's just the shock and the denial of it all. Because when I first got diagnosed, I didn't know what to think. All I knew is that I have this thing, I have to learn how to manage it, and it sucks. And that was like my initial thought is that I am very devastated because I don't know what to do with this information. And so for me, on that day, all I could think to do was write about the experience and just document it as a way for me to kind of timestamp the moment and also have a reminder to myself that, hey, you went through this and you got this diagnosis, but look how far you came. And so I was thinking, let me just write this down. Let me assess my thoughts and just read the packet and see what it had to say. Because if you heard in my last episode, I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder through a packet that one of the nurses gave to me. And so I was sitting there reading the packet and I was writing in my journal at the same time. And during that moment, I felt very humiliated, not at the fact that I had a mental illness, but at the fact that I ever thought that I couldn't get one. Because let's be real, again, we don't expect these things to happen, but the fact that I used to think that, oh, well, I'm glad that I don't have that, or I'm glad that I don't have to deal with that, or I don't think that could ever happen to me. It's like, yeah, you don't want it to happen to you, but to be a little condescending to people who do deal with that, that's where my headspace used to be. And me getting this diagnosis was like shattering that idea that I was well off because I didn't have to deal with it. So, in reading that excerpt again, it's just mind blowing because now I have a totally different attitude towards bipolar disorder, and it just makes me feel like I have come a long way in terms of accepting my diagnosis compared to the initial shock and denial that I had when I first got diagnosed. So, a year later, I was able to join a bipolar support group. And this was actually a couple of months after. So, I joined the group a couple of months after. But a couple of months after that, the following year, they had a love letter to my bipolar disorder challenge. And this challenge came from a great mental health advocate named Michelle LaRue. And he was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And he came up with an amazing challenge for World Bipolar Day, and it was just having people write a love letter to their bipolar disorder and also kind of like a reflection of how far they come in terms of managing bipolar disorder. So that was the love letter to my bipolar challenge. And my initial reaction to that challenge was a love letter. Like I was just there questioning it. I was like, there is no way that we can have some type of admiration for this mental health condition. And that was just me coming from a place of still viewing this mental health condition as something that was just going to ruin the rest of my life. Even though there are some moments where I feel that now, especially when it's getting very difficult to manage. But back then, I was still trying to navigate how I was going to receive and accept that I had this diagnosis. So the challenge intrigued me in a way where I was like, you know what? I'm going to try. I'm going to try to write a love letter to my bipolar disorder and see where it goes. And while I was writing it, I felt very hesitant. Like there was a moment where I sat in front of my computer and just stared at the screen for so long because I didn't really know what to say. Like I just didn't know how to embrace this. So I closed my laptop and I took a moment to just gather my thoughts and to really sleep on it. The next day, I decided to give it another try. And while I was writing it, it was almost as if there were just moments that were coming to my memory. All the times that I've had good days and all the times that I've had bad days. And as I was writing the letter, I felt an overwhelming sense of appreciation where I was able to just see my growth and just reflect on the fact that I have made it through a lot of difficult times, but I've also had a lot of good moments as well. And so, me writing this love letter was not only helping me to accept the fact that I had bipolar disorder, it was also helping me to learn how to love myself in the midst of having a mental health condition. Because earlier on, when I first got diagnosed, I saw myself as defective, I saw it as a character flaw, I saw myself as just very messed up as a person. And I know it sounds really terrible, but that is really just the gravity of the situation and what I was feeling in the moment of my initial diagnosis. And as I'm saying this now, it makes me so grateful for the fact that I was able to accept that I had this diagnosis and to learn that it's not indicative of my character and it's not something that defines the rest of my life, but it's just information about what was going on with me psychologically. And it's giving me the tools that I need to be able to handle it. So for me, I loved writing this love letter to my bipolar disorder, and it was something that gave me the courage to share my story with others and to even have the words to describe what it meant for me to live with a mental health condition like this. Because even before I started the podcast, I didn't really have the vernacular to describe what I experienced with my manic episode and also what I had to face in terms of managing bipolar disorder. Like, I didn't have the language for it. And so, this activity really allowed me to really sit down and dig deep and really find the words and find the explanation in order to be able to tell my story in a more effective way. So, I wrote my love letter to my bipolar disorder and I titled it Dear Bipolarity. And with that, I submitted it to the contest that the Bipolar Support Club was having, and I just waited. I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to submit my love letter and see how it goes. And through me submitting my love letter, I got to read the love letters of the other people in the group, and there was just so many people who expressed their own journeys and also how much admiration they had for themselves in managing bipolar disorder and learning how to just live well even though they had this mental health condition. And I was tearing up as I was reading these letters because it not only made me realize that other people were also dealing with it, it gave me a sense of security and acceptance to know that I am not alone and I can also make it through this. And so having this love letter challenge just gave me a greater sense of community, even though I didn't know how to process my diagnosis at first, and I thought that I was isolated in this experience. And the results of this contest was Me winning, just me being able to just win was something that was incredible. And I appreciated the fact that my letter resonated with so many other people that they just thought that it was very helpful and powerful. And I just felt good, not only about winning, but just like being able to touch that many lives with my story. It was just a wonderful experience that I will never forget. Hello again. Before you dive into the rest of today's episode, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support and for hitting that play button. If you want to expand on that support, here are 3 ways that you can do so. 1. Leave a review. If anything in today's episode resonated with you, or you want to share how the podcast changed your life, you can do so by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. 2. Check out our shop. The Rough Edges shop is a faith-based, women of color owned online shop where you can get a variety of products from tote bags, journals, t-shirts, crew necks, and more. 20% of the proceeds go to a mental health organization. So check it out at roughedgespodcast.com/shop. 3. Connect on social media. Rough Edges is on a variety of social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and more. If you want to connect outside of listening to the podcast episodes, you can do so on those platforms. If you have any more questions or want more information on the ways that I've just discussed, you can check out the episode description or stay to the end for more information. Now, enjoy your episode. Since I explained the backstory of the love letter, I wanted to share it with you. Dear Bipolarity, Dear Bipolarity, I wish I could say that it was love at first sight, but you crept into my life with no warning. In January of last year, you wrestled with me and showed me that I needed to slow down. You gave me a severe manic attack with psychosis, and you took me to the hospital where I had to spend over 2 weeks wondering what went wrong. At the time, I was angry with you. I wanted you to leave and allow me to live the life that I had before you came. I now realize that your presence was the greatest act of love that God could have shown me. When you came, I was terrified. I wanted to know if I would ever be the same again. You presented yourself as an unwelcome guest, snooping around my mind like a cat burglar. I knew you were there all along, but I ignored you. I refused to get the adequate help that I needed because I didn't want to acknowledge that you were real. In my teenage years, you tried to introduce yourself to me through constant mood swings and extreme emotions. I attributed it to hormones and puberty, but you remained constant in your mission to introduce yourself to me. After my college graduation, you decided that it was the right time to make yourself known. I was a mess when you came. With no warning, you changed my life for the better. After I got back on my feet and started undergoing my treatment plan, you were there waiting for me to get better. Through all of the pain, denial, stress, and late nights of wondering where life went wrong, you stayed with me and never let me go. You allowed me to learn something new about myself. You invigorated a sense of advocacy within me. You helped me realize that I could use this pain to help people who are going through the same process. You helped me find community when I thought I didn't have anyone who understood what I was going through. You helped me deepen the bonds that I had with close friends who had their own experiences with you. In hindsight, you enriched my life in a way that no one else could. I always wondered why God allowed us to meet. It seems like an unfortunate circumstance in the beginning, but now I'm learning that my life wouldn't be the same if you didn't show up. Rough Edges wouldn't exist if you weren't here. My community wouldn't grow if you weren't here. My relationship with God wouldn't be what it is now if you didn't come into my life. For all these things, I am eternally grateful to you because you made it happen. I can have hope knowing that I can make a difference in someone's life. Thank you for showing me that I have a greater purpose. Even 2 years later, you are still showing me how I can prioritize self care. You also showed me that God's faithfulness will prevail, even in the worst circumstances. You showed me that my voice is valuable and that there are people out there who need to hear my story. You not only helped me to deepen my relationship with God more, you also indicated that during my weak moments, Jesus always shows up with his strength. Being a mental health advocate wasn't something I signed up for, but it was one of the greatest joys that I have. It validates my story and it also makes my testimony greater. I would have never imagined I could share my faith and mental health journey with people from different parts of the world. I am grateful for the opportunity to blaze the trail for people who are dealing with mental health conditions, people of color, and women who want to learn more about their diagnosis but don't know where to start. You also showed me that I don't need to be afraid to ask for help. Through managing all the ups and downs, my community was able to show up in ways that I never thought was possible. In addition to my inner circle, there are other mental health advocates and organizations who appreciate my story and want to form a connection with me. We were able to break the stigma surrounding mental illness together, and it is such an enriching experience. Although you initially seemed like a stumbling block, you are now my greatest asset. Thank you so much for teaching me that there's more to life than my diagnosis. Thanks for teaching me that my story is valuable and that my life has meaning. Sincerely, Sarah Fox. This letter helped me in so many ways, but the ones that I want to highlight are: one, it made me realize God's goodness. Two, it helped me highlight my own growth and reflect on my journey. Three, it taught me how to embrace the process. And lastly, it gave me more confidence in sharing my story. Thank you so much for listening, and I am so happy that I was able to share all of this with you. And I hope that you share it with someone else too, especially a loved one or a friend or anybody that you know who is struggling or who is learning how to manage bipolar disorder. Just share this with them. And I hope that it would be helpful to them just as much as it could also be helpful to you in learning more about it as well. So stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. If you want more updates on the podcast, you can follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast, or you can visit the official podcast website at roughedgespodcast.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.